Afghanistan's mountainous terrain, rural villages, and Kabul city skyline. The Taliban insurgency in Afghanistan is one of the longest-running and most significant conflicts in modern history. In this video, we will trace the rise of the Taliban, their years in power, the US-led war in Afghanistan, the return of the Taliban to power in 2021, and the current situation, including the alliances formed during this decades-long conflict. The rise of the Taliban, 1990s, Soviet withdrawal in 1989, civil war in Afghanistan, and early Taliban fighters. To understand the Taliban insurgency, we must go back to the 1990s. After the Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989, the country descended into a brutal civil war between various Mujahideen factions. Amidst this chaos, the Taliban, a movement of religious students, Taliban means students in Pashto, emerged in 1994. Their aim was to restore order through a strict interpretation of Islamic law. Taliban's rise in Kandahar, battles with warlords, and their conquest of Kabul in 1996. By 1996, the Taliban had taken control of Kabul, establishing the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Their rule was characterized by strict enforcement of Sharia law, including harsh punishments and severe restrictions on women's rights. However, their governance was marked by isolation from the international community, especially due to their harboring of Al-Qaeda. US invasion and the fall of the Taliban, 2001 9/11 attacks, US airstrikes in Afghanistan, and Taliban retreat. Everything changed in 2001 when Al-Qaeda, sheltered by the Taliban, carried out the September 11th attacks in the United States. The US quickly launched Operation Enduring Freedom, targeting both Al-Qaeda and the Taliban regime. By December 2001, with the help of the Northern Alliance and US airstrikes, the Taliban were ousted from power. Taliban fighters fleeing to Pakistan, US troops entering Kabul, and the establishment of the Karzai government. The Taliban retreated into the mountains and rural areas of Afghanistan and Pakistan, where they regrouped, marking the beginning of their insurgency against the new Afghan government and NATO forces. The insurgency years, 2002 to 2021, Taliban fighters in the mountains, US and NATO troops in combat, bombings, and Afghan government forces. For the next 2 decades, the Taliban waged an insurgency against both NATO forces and the Afghan government. Their strategy involved guerrilla tactics, including ambushes, bombings, and targeted assassinations. By exploiting Afghanistan's difficult terrain and cross-border sanctuaries in Pakistan, the Taliban were able to avoid complete defeat. US and Afghan forces clashing with Taliban fighters, drone strikes, and footage of the Taliban in rural strongholds. Despite the efforts of the international community to stabilize Afghanistan, the Taliban's influence steadily grew, particularly in rural areas where they presented themselves as an alternative to a corrupt and ineffective Afghan government. Afghan villages under Taliban control and US troop withdrawals after 2014. The return of the Taliban. 2021 US withdrawal, Taliban offensive in 2021, scenes of panic at Kabul airport. In 2021, the US announced its full withdrawal from Afghanistan. After nearly 20 years of involvement, the Taliban seized this opportunity to launch a nationwide offensive. In just a few months, they captured major cities, culminating in the fall of Kabul in August 2021. The rapid collapse of the Afghan government and the chaotic evacuation of foreign nationals shocked the world. Taliban fighters entering Kabul, Afghan President Ghani fleeing, and scenes of chaos at Kabul's airport. With the Taliban back in control, they re-established the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Although they promised to govern differently, reports of repression, particularly against women and minorities, have continued to emerge. Key players and alliances map of Afghanistan showing Taliban control and resistance pockets, with labels for key allies. The Taliban, Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, Pakistan has long been accused of providing sanctuary and support to the Taliban, though Islamabad denies. The Taliban leadership has reportedly operated from Pakistan, and there is evidence of logistical and military support coming from Pakistani elements. Qatar hosted the Taliban's political office and acted as a mediator in talks between the Taliban and the US, culminating in the 2020 Doha Agreement, which paved the way for the US withdrawal. While not direct military allies, both Russia and China have engaged diplomatically with the Taliban since their return to power, seeking to ensure regional stability and secure economic interests. Taliban leadership in Qatar, interactions with Pakistani officials, and meetings with Russian and Chinese diplomats. The National Resistance Front of Afghanistan, NRF. Ahmad Massoud, son of the legendary anti-Taliban commander Ahmad Shah Massoud, Ahmad Massoud has led the resistance forces based in the Panjshir Valley. While currently limited in strength, the NRF continues to oppose Taliban rule. While the NRF has received some rhetorical support from Western powers, it has struggled to gain significant military or financial backing since the Taliban takeover. Ahmad Massoud, NRF fighters in the Panjshir Valley, and maps showing resistance areas. Current situation, 2024. Kabul, reports on women's rights, Taliban fighters patrolling streets, and economic hardship. As of 2024, the Taliban are firmly in control of Afghanistan. Their rule has returned many of the harsh policies of the 1990s, particularly regarding women's rights and education. However, the country faces severe economic challenges, compounded by international isolation and frozen assets. Women protesting for rights, economic hardships, and humanitarian aid distribution. Afghanistan's economy, already fragile, is on the brink of collapse, and millions of Afghans face hunger and poverty. The Taliban have sought international recognition but have yet to gain widespread acceptance, leaving Afghanistan increasingly isolated. Humanitarian impact and future outlook. Refugee camps, children in makeshift schools, and interviews with Afghan civilians. The humanitarian situation in Afghanistan remains dire. Over 24 million people, more than half of the population, rely on humanitarian aid. The collapse of public services, combined with international sanctions, has exacerbated the suffering of ordinary Afghans. Refugee camps, food distribution, and appeals from international aid organizations. While some countries have reopened limited diplomatic channels with the Taliban, the future of Afghanistan remains uncertain. The possibility of renewed internal resistance and the Taliban's governance challenges create a volatile and unpredictable situation for the country. Thank you for watching. We have some amazing videos coming up, so stay tuned for more updates on global geopolitics. And make sure to hit the subscribe button for more.